It's been a minute since we've had another installment of our series Fantasy Faceoff, where we put two characters from the One Piece story against each other in what we like to think of as objective combat.
Yeah, exactly. And normally, these characters would never interact, but it's fun to just imagine when two people with very similar but also opposing skill sets would meet up. So here we are with another installment of Fantasy Faceoff.
And in this installment, we are focusing on what is often a very fun discussion points for people within the One Piece story.
Honestly, might be our funnest, good word, funnest, but also definitely our most entertaining to this point.
Yeah, and that would be because we're talking about swordsmen. And obviously, swordsmen are very tied to some of the central parts of the story, but we figured what better way to start with swordsmen than with two of arguably the greatest, being Ryuma and Mihawk himself.
We're talking about an ancestor of Zoro, and not only the final goal, but at the biggest point in his growth, kind of the sensei of Zoro. So truly, the two biggest swordsmen that have had the most impact on our crew members' swordsmen the most, but that we know the least about.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is going to be kind of a central theme of this Fantasy Face-Off, being, while we know these two characters have great acclaim for what they've accomplished,
we know their reputation.
Yes, it's less so about what we've seen them doing directly on the screen, so some big part of this is going to have to be speculative, but we'll do what we always do, and we're going to first start by going over some of these characters' feats, and we can start with Ryuma.
And if we can start with feats of strength, Ryuma's greatest feats that we know, at least to this point, comes from his own series called Monsters, which recounts his journeys in Wano as a young samurai. And the ultimate confrontation in this story is when Ryuma decapitates a dragon in a single stroke. A feat kind of similar to Zoro in Punk Hazard, but on a much larger scale.
Oh, absolutely. It would absolutely be like 10 times the dragon that Zoro cut down in Punk Hazard.
Especially back then when, like, that wasn't something that's been recorded before. That's why it was recorded, is because he did it.
And because of that, he became known as the Sword God. Like, this was the event that earned him that legacy that most swordsmen in the world, I mean, at least those who have heard of Wano, would know about his legend. But moving on to feats of speed, we have very little to focus on in terms of Ryuma's speed in particular, but it is worth mentioning that even after years, likely centuries of being dead at this point, in Thriller Bark, when he has his body inhabited as a zombie and is brought back, he's still running at a speed fast enough, and we might have to partake in some cartoon physics here, but to run on the side of a building.
That's One Piece. That's One Piece fair.
Yeah.
It's fair game.
He's running on the side of a building with Zoro during their sword fight. They're running fast enough to be standing on the side of this building.
No, and I don't even think that's like some tune. I feel like that's fair game because he's dead. He's being controlled by someone else. He's got someone else's soul in him. We're not seeing it at its full potential.
Yeah, and he's still able to do that. So
exactly.
At a very diminished version of himself, we still get to see that impressive speed. So it's worth mentioning at least.
We just don't know anymore.
However, in a situation that's very less impressive for our great swordsman, we move on to battle strategy, where Ryuma was never necessarily known for being the most cunning character in One Piece. And in multiple situations in Monsters, rather than converse with a criminal that's like, here's a dragon horn that can help you out, he just killed the guy and then did what he had to do by cutting off the dragon's head.
And I feel like that is how we know that he is truly Zoro's ancestor. Because Zoro would be the same way if he didn't have the rest of the crew to help him out.
And just like Zoro as well, while he might not be the brightest when it comes to grand plans, he does have a very keen sense of battle and has a very quick reaction time. He knows how to keep himself alive. His ability to plan ahead might be a lot more questionable, but when it comes down to the thick of battle, he is somebody that is not lost about his wits whatsoever.
No, and if anything, he one-upped them just with his pure strength and ability, because his swordsmanship was so refined that he was deemed the sword god, and is one of only 2 characters throughout the entire story with a black blade that we know of to this point, which is speculated to be a result of imbuing one sword with incredibly potent haki over a period of time.
And it is also worth noting that while we don't know officially when exactly Ryuma lived within the One Piece world, it seems like it's somewhat divided between slightly around the Void Century or about 400 years ago. But we do know that because of his legend and the legend of the other samurai in Wano, the world government, once they took power, decided not to mess with the isolated nation. He had such a legacy of being such a powerful individual, likely, if he did exist in the Void Century, only second to Joy Boy, that they decided they were not going to even try and invade.
Absolutely. And I feel like it could tie back to the 3 samurai that Yamato saw in that cave that Kaido threw in. Wouldn't shock me one bit if they were all inspired by Ryuma. Mm-hmm. That he taught them that resilience, that, hey, even if you're staring death in the face and you know you can't do this, truly no way out, go down swinging, go through with it. And I think that's the only way Zoro could have that same way. He's met death, he's been outclassed, but he still keeps going. Mm-hmm. It's in his blood.
I'd say it's very possible that Ryuma passed on that kind of relentless nature about death to the people of Wano. And let's speak about greatest feats, because while Ryuma's decapitation of the dragon in one strike is a very easy answer, as that's kind of the most impressive thing we've seen him do thus far, as a more fun answer, I think it's also worth noting just how impressive it is that his legacy lasted for centuries afterwards, for a government that is so willing to destroy and take over anything.
Specifically that,
that they wouldn't touch this island.
Yeah, they're like, hey, if you've got the balls to go learn who this is, good luck. Because, they're like, we don't have to erase it. He'll erase you. Even after death.
Years and years after death. They knew he was gone. There's no way Imu didn't know he was gone at that point. They just still didn't want to try it again.
I mean, they had one of the warlords there. Like, they clearly knew. They definitely... Because, Moria wasn't, shy about talking about it.
Yeah. He stole Ryuma's body from Wano anyway.
And they definitely kept tabs on him. That's
just an impressive side effect of his existence, I guess, but that would be a pretty impressive feat to look at it in that regard.
And it's something that's very easy to overlook, but definitely bears repeating.
Absolutely. However, I do think it is time we look at the other side of this battle, being the one and only Dracul Mihawk.
Yeah. Insane character. Still waiting to really see him in action, in the current story, but already, feats of strength. He's got quite a few, but the one that really stands out to us is during Marineford, when he sliced an iceberg the size of Marineford in half.
And while it almost looked like it was going to be an attack on Luffy at first that he dodged, but that attack traveled like a kilometer of land.
Right, it wasn't even close range. He threw that.
And it cut the whole thing clean in one strike. So...
And he looked bored.
He's still not trying as hard as... I think the biggest thing with Mihawk to remember is all of these is he's still
really
never gone all out.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, with that in mind, let's move over to feats of speed, because I think this one's probably the most difficult to gauge for a character like Mihawk, who really hasn't had the need to evade a whole lot thus far.
And it really does boil down to the fact that his strength means he doesn't have to. Every time we see him in defense, it's not that he has to dodge. It's not that he's running. It's just deflect.
Mm-hmm. Or cut in half.
Yeah.
I think the closest thing we can get to a gauge for his speed would be considering his clashes that he had with Shanks in the past.
Which would have definitely taken speed, yeah. Because with his future sight especially, you have to be
And to the fact that when we saw Shanks destroy Kid in his ship, the way he went from his ship to Kid's in a matter of like a second, and you're gonna tell me he was dueling with Mihawk and he wasn't
I can't wait until we get a flashback of their fights. You know we'll get it eventually. It's gotta just be like
just jumping island to island, flashing.
A complete, like, perfect mix of trying to get the jump but also being on the defense, because they're trying to get ahead, but can't let him get the jump.
They always said that they rang throughout the Grand Line, so like if they were literally jumping island to island fighting each other,
right? They just flashed by, like, oh, there they go.
Mm-hmm. That would be a pretty sick way to look at it. However, I think looking at battle strategy, it's really difficult to gauge because Mihawk doesn't give off the impression of somebody that's like a mastermind trying to pull all the strings of a situation like Doflamingo. But he is literally always so composed and put together every time we see him, regardless of the situation. He's the same guy.
Absolutely. And it does feel like when he has to think a little, he's like, all right, what's the easiest way out? Even like with Buggy and all the things he's got to go through with that, it's never a problem. He's like, all right, we'll do this. I mean, he was the one that talked on Crocodile, right?
Yeah, he was the one that also agreed
said,
into Cross Guild.
Yeah, like, we can make this work,
and we can make him the face of it.
Yeah, and if there's a problem.
So the bigger thing with Mihawk is just, you really nailed it with that. He's trying to think about the most efficient way to get something done, and there's sometimes that can be seen as laziness, but more often than not, it's a demonstration of how efficient he is with what he does.
And honestly, that's the biggest flaw I could see in his strategy, is that he could just get too comfortable. He could get too bored, or like just think it's too easy. But I also feel like he's able to gauge that.
Yeah, well, the thing is with getting complacent too is he's reached the apex, but he's been there for so long. He's still looking for the sense of a good fight. So I don't think he's lost a step in that regard. I think it's more that he's just so bored because he knows he's never in a situation he can't handle.
Yeah, and let me skip ahead for a second, because that actually takes us perfectly. We can talk about his special abilities, but like his greatest feat is actually how comfortable he is. He spent 2 years training the person he wants to beat him. Literally.
Because there's no other option.
Because he said, this is the closest thing, but you're not even in my stratosphere. Let me spend 2 years making you a better swordsman so that you can eventually get to my level with Zoro.
And this was the same dude that at the start of the story he beat with a tiny little butter knife.
But he also saw it then, and he said, you made it here? Let me help you get eventually to where you really want to be.
And it's like we said, because he's just simply so bored of, ever since Shanks lost his arm, having nobody that genuinely feels like a challenge anymore. That he, in his own boredom and a pursuit for a good fight, created arguably the next greatest swordsman in the world.
And that's so insane, but like that's how good of a swordsman he is. Like, we haven't seen it, but do you know how good you have to be to help someone try to kill you?
I mean, all for the sake of a good fight.
Man.
Everybody knows that's going to be the craziest fight in One Piece. I have to believe.
Go so hard.
But
totally gonna eat.
We are going to see some of his special abilities in that we can revisit now. As I think it's pretty easy to assume Mihawk has all 3 types of haki, and especially as we mentioned before, being the only other Black Blade user in the story, you have to believe he has some level of incredible haki to be imbuing into his weapon.
Well, and I would also assume, like, just like Ryuma can take over Zoro, I would bet he has to control his Black Blade. Like
hold it back,
no regular person can pick that up and use it.
Oh, absolutely not. It's also just massive.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think it's better than Zoro's. So imagine what it could do. Like, I truly feel like he's been holding back.
Oh, I mean, not even holding back. We're just not needing to go all out.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah.
There's no reason to. But with all of this being said about Mihawk, I think we've now touched on each area of comparison. And I think we wanted to decide who would win each area, but for once in this series, we were in total consensus in every category.
Yeah, we don't gotta talk about it. So we'll just start with strength. It's definitely Mihawk.
I mean, Ryuma is a thing of legends. His strength rings out for centuries. But from what we can tangibly see so far, I think it's hard to deny somebody who slashed through hundreds of galleons with Krieg's armada, who cut an entire tsunami that was frozen midair, and all the while hasn't broken a sweat to do so.
And could also challenge Shanks. Like, Ryuma, sure. He was defending against, the outside world. This is a specific, extremely strong, maybe the best, hockey user that we're ever gonna see.
Potentially.
I'm
really interested to see what people do with his hockey.
Exactly. It also depends on Shanks' level. But, man, and then the fact that he would go to him and be like, yeah, I'm not gonna fight you anymore. It wouldn't be fair.
It's boring.
Yeah. That just, someone who survived this long and still hasn't even been equaled. Not been bested, but even been equaled.
However, it's not as though Ryuma won't get any wins, as when it comes to speed, I think it's worth mentioning that Ryuma does seem to demonstrate a greater level of ability here. Obviously, Mihawk is not going to be slow, especially keeping up with Shanks, but in Ryuma's own story, just the casual nature of which he went from having a conversation to jumping and immediately cutting a dragon's head off, it was like a Sanji kind of movement, and those kinds of characters are well renowned for their speed, so we do think that Ryuma should take this category.
Yeah, especially because, it seems like Mihawk, at least for now, from what we know, it's reaction. But Ryuma, that was him just being like, no, you can't keep up with me. I got it.
It was a demonstration of just how quickly he can clean up a situation that seems pretty bad. But we, again, will return the next point right back to Mihawk as well when it comes to battle strategy. More because of Ryuma's very strong-headed nature and his very Zoro-like tendency to just kind of do things until they work.
If you created Zoro, even through a generation or two, you can't be that smart.
No.
But also, Mihawk, he clearly understands how to get the upper hand, or at least not how to give away the upper hand.
Yeah, no, I think a very strong sense of clairvoyance is a good way to describe Mihawk.
That's a great way to explain it.
He's very composed and collected, and he's always just kind of looking for the next step. It's never seemed like he's been overwhelmed. However, we are going to have to give the ultimate greatest feat so far to Ryuma, because we may learn something about Mihawk and how he became the greatest swordsman that's just insane. But to have your own namesake dissuade a government with the Marines at their backing, with an evil, corrupted ruler at the top of the food chain, away from your island, after you've been deep and buried in the dirt, is something that can't be overlooked.
I mean, and even after all that, he also just put a dragon down with one strike. I ain't seen anyone else do that. That took Luffy 1,000 chapters, you know what I'm saying? Forever, and a lot of help. This dude clearly just raw would not die.
Mm-hmm.
Had his shit together and knew how to finish the job.
So, with all of that in mind, we come to our final 2 questions worth asking before deciding on a winner. And that's the importance of attack versus defense. So, in our first scenario, with Ryuma being the one on the attack, we do think that might be his best chance. I think getting a level of surprise on Mihawk, who's supposed to be somebody who's so hyper-observant, might be the best case scenario of getting an even footing in this fight, by turning it from a ranged fight into an up-close encounter.
Truly, because it's really tough to compare their maximum strength when we haven't seen either at their strongest. But that would also make it a closer contest. But you also got to consider that, Ryuma was doing that without anything to go off. Zoro was getting trained, he's had things to base it off of, and he had help.
Mihawk likely had training too.
Exactly.
But yeah, Ryuma was a natural.
Yeah, and when you go back to like the fact that Zoro is related to him, I think he is the maybe better technical swordsman. I think Mihawk just has more skills.
Potentially, yeah. And with the other way around, if Mihawk is the one attacking and gets the drop on Ryuma, I have a feeling that would make it a more one-sided contest.
Yeah.
I think Ryuma is very strong when it comes to being in the heat of battle, but when somebody like Mihawk, who's very much on predicting the next reactionary move, has the upper hand...
And can bounce it off.
It's going to be a uphill fight the whole way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because he's never taken a hit. Like,
no, not that we've seen. He's not taken a single hit.
Yeah. So ultimate winner.
It comes.
It's Mihawk.
Yeah, it comes down to Mihawk. When it seems like we have to come up for more reasons that Ryuma gets an upper hand.
And yeah, we could be proven wrong with more information about it, but like it seems what we got. It's Mihawk.
And like you said, when natural talent faces off against other natural talent that has the ability to hone it to an even greater degree, it's just like improving the product.
Yeah, and you could also just look at like Mihawk has been going against hundreds of years of training since he started, you know? And it wouldn't be right if Zoro's final battle, like ultimate goal, his dream, was anyone less than someone above the only reason he's here.
I mean, like you're saying, it's the matter of going down as the greatest of all time rather than the second greatest of all time. Right. That number means a big difference in terms of legacy.
That's what it's all about.
And so, until we are proven wrong, that is the conclusion we came to. Let us know in the comments below whether you agree or disagree, and tell us why. Like the video if you enjoy the ongoing series. Subscribe if you're enjoying this kind of content, once again. And as always, be crew.